That night, after the show aired, Mom called me. "You were radiant," she said. "Your Nana would have been so proud." I laughed through tears. "I wore her locket on air," she gasped. "You remembered?" I never forget the women who helped me find mine. One more email came in, this time from the National Library Foundation. They were curating a panel titled Trans Voices in Literature, and they wanted me as their closing keynote speaker. Not just a guest. A headliner. I stared at the screen in disbelief. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was my voice finally heard. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Subject line: "Would you come back and speak?" The message was from Ms. Gordon, my old English teacher, the one who always encouraged me to write from the heart, even when I was too scared to raise my hand. She'd read my book. Her message was warm, full of exclamation marks and smiley faces, but what hit hardest was the last line. "We'd be honored to have you speak at our school's Creative Expression Day. The students could really use someone like you right now." It didn't say, "Dylan, would you come back?" It said, "You, Skylar." Riley offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this one alone. I chose a soft mauve dress with a cardigan and boots, professional but unmistakably me. As I pulled into the school parking lot, memories rushed in, lockers that jammed, bathrooms I hid in, the long hallways where I used to shrink myself smaller just to avoid being seen. And now, I was walking back in, taller than I'd ever felt before. She greeted me at the front door with a hug that was stronger than I expected. "You haven't changed a bit," she said, beaming. "Except that you have, and it's glorious." Her eyes were a little misty. Mine were too. She led me into the multipurpose room where dozens of students were seated on the floor, chatting, texting, half listening, until I stepped onto the stage. And the room got quiet. I took a deep breath and looked at the sea of faces, some curious, some guarded, some that looked just like me at their age, uncertain and hiding. Then I began. "My name is Skylar Monroe. Some of you might know someone like me. You might even be someone like me. I came back here not because I had all the answers, but because I finally stopped being afraid to ask the questions." I told them about discovering my reflection, about the wedding dress, about fear and freedom, about the power of writing your own story before someone else tries to write it for you. When I finished, the applause was hesitant, then stronger. Afterward, students lined up to ask questions or just to say thank you. But one student stood off to the side alone, silent. When the crowd thinned, they finally approached me. They had short-cropped hair, downcast eyes, and sleeves pulled over their hands. They didn't say much. Just this: "You made me feel less invisible." They didn't give their name. But they didn't have to. I recognized that silence. I had lived inside it for years. And now I had broken through it, so they could too. When I walked back out to the parking lot, I wasn't the same girl who had arrived. I didn't feel haunted by the past anymore. I had walked back into the place where I once hid everything. And walked out as everything I had once hidden. It showed up in my inbox, sandwiched between a newsletter about sweater sales and a reminder to pay a library fine. Subject: Skylar Monroe, adaptation rights request, urgent. I nearly deleted it, thinking it was spam. But it wasn't. It was a real letter from a real production company, Starling Pictures, the indie studio known for turning personal memoirs into acclaimed miniseries. They wanted to adapt Becoming Real. As in, make a show about me. They flew me to Los Angeles for the meeting. I sat in a conference room with glass walls, polished floors, and more water bottles than any human could reasonably consume. The executive producer leaned across the table and said, "Skylar, your story isn't just important, it's urgent. There's a generation of kids out there waiting to see themselves on screen. We want to honor your voice. But we want your blessing too." I was stunned. They didn't just want to buy the rights, they wanted me involved. To help write, consult, even cast. It didn't feel real. Until it was. Over the next month, I reviewed headshots, screen tests, audition clips. Girls from all over the country submitted tapes, some shy, some polished, some too Hollywood for their own good. But none of them felt quite right. Not until I saw her. Her name was Ari Jensen, and she was only 17. She wasn't a trained actor. She'd never been on camera before. But in her self-tape, she sat on the edge of her bed, wearing a hoodie and no makeup. She read a passage from the book, The Wedding Dress Scene. And when she finished, she whispered, "Thank you for writing this. It's the first time I've seen a story that felt like mine." My hands trembled. I clicked play again. Then again. She was Skylar. At the official table read in New York, I finally met her in person. We hugged. She was shaking. "You okay?" I asked. "I was scared to audition," she said. "I thought they'd want someone prettier, more polished, someone who could pass better." I looked her in the eyes. "Ari, you didn't need to pass. You belonged." Then she pulled something from her backpack. It was my book. Dog-eared. Highlighted. Sticky notes lining the chapters. She smiled. "This book saved me." I nearly broke down right there. Watching the first rehearsal was surreal. Ari stood center stage in a replica of Mom's wedding dress. The lighting, the hair, the breathless corset moment, it was all exact. But the most powerful part? She wasn't mimicking me. She was channeling me. She had taken the words I once wrote in a dark, quiet room and turned them into something alive. Riley whispered beside me in the front row, "That's her. That's you." I couldn't breathe. I didn't need to. For once, the world was breathing for me. The red carpet wasn't red. It was lilac, chosen by Ari, in honor of the color I wore the first time I introduced myself as Skylar. I stood just off to the side at the premiere, watching the crowd shuffle in. I didn't feel like a celebrity. I felt like a girl who had once cried in her mom's lap, terrified no one would ever call her by the name that made her feel real. But tonight, everyone was saying it. "Skylar. Skylar Monroe over here. Can we get a quote from the Skylar?" It was surreal. The lights, the cameras, the buzz. But then, right as the cast was being ushered toward the photo backdrop, I saw him. I wasn't sure at first. He looked different. A little broader. Cleaner haircut. Wearing a suit that looked rented. But when he turned to face me fully, I felt the jolt in my gut. Zach Jacobs. The boy who used to slam my locker shut before I finished grabbing my books. The one who used to call me freak, fairy, and once nothing. And now, he was walking toward me. My body tensed instinctively. Fight or flight. But I stood my ground. "Skylar," he asked, voice softer than I remembered. "Yes," I said calmly. He looked down, cleared his throat. "I don't want to take up your night. I saw the trailer. And I knew I had to be here. I didn't think you'd talk to me." "I didn't think you'd want to," I replied. He winced. "I wouldn't blame you if you hate me." There was a pause. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "I wrote this weeks ago, just in case I saw you." I didn't take it. He placed it on the table nearby and nodded. "I was a coward. But you? You turned out incredible. I'm sorry I didn't see you back then." I didn't read it until 2 days later. Alone in my room. Booked solid with press and interviews, but this moment, I carved out for myself. The letter was clumsy. Apologetic. Raw. I never understood what I was afraid of. Maybe I saw something in you that I couldn't name in myself. Maybe I hated how free you were, even when you were hiding it. All I know is I see you now. And I'm sorry for all the ways I tried to make you disappear. It ended with, "If you ever want to talk or just yell at me, I deserve that too. But I'll be in the front row when your story airs. Because you taught me something no teacher ever did." I didn't cry, but I did feel release. Some ghosts don't disappear, but they can be disarmed. The show premiered that weekend. Millions watched. The wedding dress. The attic mirror. The hallway stairs. The quiet tears in the school bathroom. Ari's portrayal was hauntingly honest. But the final scene? Skylar walking into the school library in a soft lilac dress, head held high, greeted not with whispers, but with smiles. The screen faded to black. And then my real voice echoed over the credits. I used to think my story was something to be ashamed of. But it turns out, telling it saved me. And maybe it'll save someone else too. The day after the series premiere, I received a call from my editor, Sarah, the same woman who had taken a chance on becoming real when it was just a draft full of my fears and hopes. She didn't even say hello before jumping in. "So, are you ready to write again?" I laughed. I just survived a book tour and a TV launch. I think I've earned a nap. She paused, then said something that changed everything. This time, we don't want just your voice. We want you to help others tell their stories too. Sarah explained that the publishing house was launching a new series, Echoes, a collection of memoirs, essays, and personal narratives from young trans, non-binary, and questioning writers around the country. They wanted me to curate it, edit it, champion it. In short, they wanted me to pass the mic. Without hesitation, I said yes. It wasn't even a decision, because I remembered what it was like to feel alone, to search the library shelves and online blogs for even one story that sounded like mine. And now I had a chance to build an entire bookshelf of them for the next kid hiding under their blanket with a flashlight and a notebook full of secrets. We opened up the call for submissions quietly, just a single social media post and a few emails to LGBTQ+ youth centers. The inbox overflowed. Stories from tiny towns and big cities. Stories of pain, of coming out in secret, of joy in lipstick for the first time, of losing friends, but finding family in unexpected places. Some were just a few paragraphs. Others were whole novels in progress. But they were real, and raw, and needed. One evening, Riley came into the living room holding her laptop, tears in her eyes. "You have to read this one," she said. It was a letter from a 13-year-old trans girl named Ivy, who wrote about writing poems in the margins of her math textbook and using her older sister's makeup in secret when everyone else was asleep. At the end, Ivy wrote, "I don't know if I'm brave yet, but maybe if someone like Skylar reads this, maybe I will be." I printed it out and pinned it above my desk. Because that's why I said yes. I arranged a Zoom call with the 10 writers we'd chosen for the first volume of Echoes. There were tears, laughter, nervous smiles. One of them asked, "Why me?" "I'm not special." And I answered, "You don't have to be famous. You just have to be honest. Your truth is what makes the world wider for the next person." They nodded. Some wiped their eyes. And I knew we were building something bigger than books. We were building belonging. A week before the publishing announcement, Mom dropped by with a small gift box. Inside was a quill-shaped pin made of silver and amethyst. "It was your grandmother's," she said. "She always believed stories could heal. She would have been proud of you." I clutched it to my chest, overwhelmed. Not just by her words, but by the thought that maybe, for the first time in generations, I wasn't just rewriting my story. I was rewriting my family's. The Echoes project was moving beautifully. Manuscripts were being shaped. Voices were getting stronger. Our group chat overflowed with late-night questions, shared playlists, and nervous memes about being real authors now. But then, Leo stopped replying. Leo, the sharp, sarcastic 17-year-old from rural Kentucky, who wrote with the kind of rawness that made editors pause and reread every line. At first, I thought it was just school. Then a few days passed. Then a week. Email? Nothing. DMs? Seen but unanswered. I messaged Riley late one night. "I think something's wrong with Leo." I was in bed when my phone buzzed. Blocked number. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something told me to. Hey. The voice was shaky, whispering, familiar. It was Leo. They sounded different. Smaller. Scared. I didn't know who else to call, they said. I left. Left where? I asked. Silence. Then, home. Leo explained everything in fragments. They had come out as non-binary to their father, who hadn't just rejected them, but threatened them. Said they were an embarrassment. That they'd be sent away. So Leo packed a backpack, took $80 from their birthday envelope stash, and boarded a Greyhound bus to the nearest city. Now they were sitting in a 24-hour diner, cold, exhausted, and unsure what to do next. I shouldn't have called, they whispered. I just remembered what you wrote. About running out of closets to hide in. You called the right person, I said. Within 10 minutes, Riley was up, dressed, and on her laptop. By sunrise, we'd arranged a temporary housing placement through a trans youth network she'd helped build through her legal contacts. Leo would stay with a verified host home, safe, warm, and no questions asked. We booked a train ticket and sent them money for a cab. I stayed on the phone the whole time. You don't have to tell me everything, I said. But I'll stay until you get there. And I did. That night, Leo messaged. They have a bookshelf in the guest room. With your book on it. They said, welcome home. I didn't know that could happen. Thank you for being the one I could call. I stared at the screen, heartbreaking and mending at the same time. They weren't just part of Echoes now. They were part of my family. Weeks later, as we finalized the book, I asked every writer to submit a dedication. Leo's was last to arrive. It read, to the one who picked up the phone when I had nowhere to go. You didn't just save my story. You saved me. I cried in the middle of the kitchen. Riley pulled me into her arms and whispered, you're not just building books, Sky. You're building bridges. The email subject line read, you've been nominated. Prism Award for Outstanding Debut Author. I stared at it for a full minute before even opening it. The Prism Awards were like the Oscars of queer literature, reserved for voices that shifted the culture, shook ceilings, or changed hearts. Me? A girl who used to whisper her name into a mirror? I couldn't believe it. But there it was. Skylar Monroe. Becoming Real. Finalist. Everyone else was thrilled. Riley cried and called my mom before I even had the chance. The Echoes writers sent exploding heart emojis and voice notes screaming with joy. But me? I felt paralyzed. Suddenly, I wasn't sure I deserved it. What if the book only mattered because it was sad? What if they nominated the girl with a story, not the writer? What if I got on stage and they all realized I didn't belong? The night before the ceremony, I had a dream. I was standing on stage, holding the award. Everyone was clapping until they weren't. The lights went out. When they came back on, the dress I was wearing had vanished, and I was back in middle school clothes, invisible, forgotten. The crowd looked confused. Who is he supposed to be? Someone whispered. I woke up shaking. Riley found me on the couch at 4 a.m., staring into the dark. I don't think I can go, I whispered. She didn't argue. She just said, then we won't go for the award. We'll go for the girl who thought she'd never be seen. It wasn't a designer piece. It wasn't flashy. It was a long, slate blue wrap dress with sleeves that fluttered when I moved, and a neckline that didn't make me feel exposed, just present. I slipped on the necklace my mom gave me. The one that said, Sky. Then I stood in front of the mirror. And for the first time before a big moment, I didn't feel like I was dressing up. I felt like I was dressing as. The theater was dazzling. I was seated next to authors whose books I used to check out in secret, stuffing them into jackets to hide the covers. When my category came up, I reached for Riley's hand. The presenter opened the envelope and smiled. And the Prism Award for Outstanding Debut goes to Skylar Monroe, Becoming Real. I froze. Riley whispered, that's you, Sky. Go get it. I walked up to the podium, hands trembling, heart beating like thunder. I looked out over the crowd and took a breath. This story began with a mirror. I didn't like what I saw. But writing taught me to rewrite the reflection one sentence at a time. I'm honored that Becoming Real touched lives. But more than that, I'm grateful that it gave me mine. To every kid still whispering their truth into silence. I hear you. And I promise, you are not alone anymore. Afterward, someone approached me. A stranger, maybe 20 years older, eyes shining. She said, my daughter just came out last month. She was terrified. But she read your book. And now she walks taller. Thank you. I smiled, eyes misting. Not because of the award. But because Skylar was no longer a secret. She was a symbol. It started with a voicemail. Hey sweetheart, it's Mom. Nothing urgent, just feeling a bit run down. Going to get checked out tomorrow. No big deal. But something in her voice felt off. We talked almost daily for years, but this time, she sounded tired, not physically, but spiritually tired. The kind that makes you sit up straighter in the middle of the night. Riley noticed too. Maybe we should go see her, she said gently. We packed that night and drove home first thing in the morning. The fluorescent lights in the clinic buzzed softly overhead. Mom sat in a blue gown, legs crossed, reading a book like it was just another Tuesday. But her hands kept twitching. She was faking calm the same way I once faked boyhood, smiling on the surface, crumbling beneath. The doctor came in with a clipboard and too many pauses. Then the words hit. Early stage breast cancer. I froze. Mom reached out and held my hand before I could break. I'm okay, Sky, she said, stronger than I expected. Caught it early. We'll fight it. She had always taken care of me. When I was scared to speak my truth. When I cried over clothes I was afraid to wear in public. When I broke down after that first heartbreak and she held me like I was 5 years old again. Now it was my turn. I made her soup, tied her headscarves, sat through chemo sessions and read her old poetry out loud to distract her from the Ford drip. And when she felt like giving up, I reminded her she made me strong enough to carry her now. One night while organizing the linen closet, I found a dusty shoebox labeled Sky's Light. Inside were dozens of postcards, all sent to me, never delivered. Dates from before I ever came out. Back then, she must have written them, then never sent them, tiny messages to the daughter she didn't yet know she had. One read, I don't know who you'll be yet, but I already love you. Another, you're going to be bolder than I ever was, and I can't wait to meet her. I cried until Riley pulled me into bed and held me like I used to hold that wedding dress, carefully, reverently, like something sacred. When Mom's hair started falling out, she tried to laugh it off. It's just hair, she said, but I could see the pain behind her smile. So I made a decision. The next morning, I walked into the living room with clippers in hand and said, let's make it a thing. We shaved our heads together. I let Riley livestream it. And by the next day, the hashtag #SkyandMom hashtag was trending. We turned grief into solidarity, vulnerability into strength. After 4 brutal months, the oncologist gave us a tentative smile. The tumor's gone. You still have healing ahead, but you're in the clear. Mom exhaled the kind of breath I didn't realize she'd been holding since spring. We celebrated with vanilla cake and soft music in the kitchen, just the 3 of us. She looked at me over her glass of wine and said, you know what got me through? What? I asked. You, she said simply. I raised a girl who's stronger than I ever imagined. And she gave me her strength back when I needed it most. It was tucked inside her nightstand drawer, sealed with red wax and my name written in her neat, unmistakable handwriting. To Skylar. Do not open until I'm no longer here. She had told me about it once, gently, during her recovery. I don't want to be morbid, honey, she had said, but I've written you something. Just in case. I had nodded, brushed it off. Just in case felt too far away, too unreal. And for a while, it stayed that way. Until it wasn't. It happened softly. She had survived cancer. She was regaining her strength. We were even planning a trip to Scotland, a dream of hers since college. Then, one autumn morning, she just didn't wake up. No pain. No warning. The doctor called it a silent heart attack. I called it a crack in the universe. I held her hand in that quiet hospital room and whispered through tears, I wasn't ready. No part of me was. I didn't open the envelope for days. I kept it in my purse like an emotional grenade, afraid of what it might explode inside me. But one evening, after everyone had gone home from the memorial, after Riley had fallen asleep curled beside me, I sat on the porch under the dim porch light. And I read, My Sky. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer physically by your side. But please know I never left you. Not really. You were born into a world that tried to tell you who to be, and you rewrote every rule. I watched you blossom into the girl I knew was always there, even before you did. What an honor it was to witness your becoming. I was never a perfect mother. I got scared. I second-guessed. But loving you was never complicated. It was the clearest truth I ever had. Asterisk when you feel lost, or alone, or unsure of who you are. Just remember, you were named after the sky for a reason. Asterisk. Because there is no ceiling for you, my girl. Only horizon. All my love. Mom. I held the letter to my chest and sobbed until the stars blurred above me. I didn't know how I'd move forward. But I knew I had to. For her. For me. For every version of me she loved before, during, and after I knew how to love myself. Weeks later, I did something unexpected. I started a nonprofit. Named it Only Horizon. Its mission? to support trans teens and their families, especially single parents like mine who didn't always have a roadmap but chose love anyway. The first scholarship we awarded went to a girl named Ivy. Yes, that Ivy. Grief isn't a door that shuts. It's a window that sometimes fogs over and sometimes lets in golden light. I still talk to her. In dreams. In letters I never send. In the way I show up in the world with softness and strength wrapped into one girl named Sky. It wasn't a grand gesture. No skywriting. No flash mob. Just a quiet evening on the back porch, soft fairy lights overhead, and Riley holding a ring between her fingers with hands that had steadied me through every storm. I don't want a perfect life, she said. I just want a real one with you. I cried. Then nodded. Then kissed her like I was sealing something sacred. Because I was. Everyone kept asking what kind of wedding we'd have. The answer? One that honored all of me, past, present, becoming. We chose an outdoor venue, surrounded by trees and sky. I wore a soft ivory gown with sheer sleeves that reminded me of the dress I once tried on in Mom's attic, the one that started it all. But every time we added a name to the guest list, my heart clenched. There would be one chair she'd never fill. I had it placed near the front. Not tucked away in shadow. Right where she would have sat with the best view. We tied a bundle of her favorite lilacs to the back and draped a ribbon across the seat. On it was a small wooden sign Riley had made. Reserved for Sky's first believer. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew. As the music swelled and I stood at the top of the aisle, arm in arm with my father, yes, my dad, now fully back in my life and proudly escorting his daughter in front of everyone, I looked toward the crowd. Tears. Smiles. Flashbulbs. And one chair that wasn't empty anymore. Because when I looked at it, I didn't feel absence. I felt her. Her love. Her words. Her strength. Wrapped around me like a second veil. Riley went first. You didn't become someone new. You unfolded who you always were. And I get to marry the girl who rewrote her own name into the stars. I was shaking by the time I started. I used to think I'd never wear a dress in front of anyone. That I'd never say I do and be seen as me. But here I am, held, loved, and standing in truth. You don't complete me, Riley. You remind me I was whole all along. We both cried. Everyone cried. Our first dance was to a cello version of You Are My Sunshine, the song Mom used to hum when brushing my hair. I didn't sing the words. I just held them in my chest like a prayer. And as we swayed, I looked up at the sky. And imagined her dancing too. Later that night, under a canopy of stars and lanterns, Riley and I stole away to the hill behind the venue. We laid in the grass, fingers intertwined. I think she would have liked it, I said softly. She would have loved it, Riley whispered. She would have loved you. I miss her, I said. I know, she replied. But look around, Sky, she's everywhere. And she was. In the wind. In the lilacs. In every breath I took as a wife, a daughter, a woman finally living in the open. A year after the wedding, Riley and I returned to my childhood home. We were helping my dad box up some of Mom's things, donations, memory keepsakes, the occasional forgotten treasure. Upstairs, buried beneath old blankets in the attic, I found it. The mirror. The one that had once shown me a stranger in a wedding dress. I wiped off the dust with my sleeve and stared into it again. But this time, there was no confusion, no pretending, no ache. Just Skylar, smiling back. The producers behind the TV adaptation had followed up with a second offer, a documentary on trans storytelling. But this time, I wouldn't just be the subject. I'd direct. Riley filmed the first interview of me standing in front of the mirror with a voiceover that said, I spent years running from reflections. Trying to bend my body to match the world's words. But I've learned, it's not about changing your reflection. It's about reclaiming it. After filming Wrapped, I went home and did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote a letter. To the boy I used to be. Dear Dylan, thank you. For surviving. For enduring. For carrying our story long enough until I was strong enough to carry it myself. You were never broken. Just unfinished. I'm not erasing you. I'm continuing you through laughter, softness, strength, and heels I finally know how to walk in. Asterisk, you got us here. I'll take it from here. Asterisk. Love. Skylar. At a youth gala for the Only Horizon Foundation, I was asked to speak one last time. Hundreds of teens in the crowd, some openly trans, some still cloaked in fear, some who had just started whispering their truths to the dark. I stood at the podium and said, I used to dream about becoming a girl in secret. Then I dreamed about being seen as one. And now? I don't have to dream it anymore. I am the girl in the mirror. And if I can become her, so can you. The applause was thunderous. But what I heard louder than claps, the quiet breath of every kid in the room, exhaling, like they were finally allowed to exist. Later that night, Riley found me brushing my hair in the mirror. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, You know what I see? What? I murmured. She kissed the back of my neck and said, The most real woman I've ever known. I looked at the mirror one last time. The girl inside didn't flinch, didn't fade. She smiled. She was me. At last.